The term crime does not, in modern times, have any simple and universally accepted definition, but one definition is that a crime, also called an offense, or a criminal offense, is an act harmful not only to some individual but also to the community, or the state, a public wrong. Such acts are forbidden and punishable by law. The idea that acts like murder, rape, and theft are prohibited exists all around the world and probably has universal moral basis. What precisely is a criminal offense is defined by criminal law of each country. While many have a catalogue of crimes called the Criminal Code, in some common law countries no such comprehensive statute exists. The state government has the power to severely restrict one's liberty for committing a crime. Therefore, in modern societies, a criminal procedure must be adhered to during the investigation and trial. Only if found guilty, the offender may be sentenced to punishment such as community sentence, imprisonment, life imprisonment, or, in some jurisdictions, even death. To be classified as a crime, the act of doing something bad, Estar US, must be usually accompanied by the intention to do something bad, mens rea, with certain exceptions, strict liability. While every crime violates the law, not every violation of the law counts as a crime. Breaches of private law, torts, and breaches of contract are not automatically punished by the state, but can be enforced through civil procedure. Overview. When informal relationships and sanctions prove insufficient to establish and maintain a desired social order, a government or a state may impose more formalized or stricter systems of social control. With institutional and legal machinery at their disposal, agents of the state can compel populations to conform to codes and can opt to punish or attempt to reform those who do not conform. Authorities employ various mechanisms to regulate, encouraging or discouraging certain behaviors in general. Governing or administering agencies may, for example, codify rules into laws, police citizens and visitors to ensure that they comply with those laws, and implement other policies and practices that legislators or administrators have prescribed with the aim of discouraging or preventing crime. In addition, authorities provide remedies and sanctions, and collectively these constitute a criminal justice system. Legal sanctions vary widely in their severity. They may include, for example, incarceration of temporary character aimed at reforming the convict. Some jurisdictions have penal codes written to inflict permanent harsh punishments, legal mutilation, capital punishment, or life without parole. Usually a natural person perpetrates a crime, but legal persons may also commit crimes. Conversely, at least under U.S. law, non-persons such as animals cannot commit crimes. The sociologist Richard Quinney has written about the relationship between society and crime. When Quinney states crime is a social phenomenon, he envisages both how individuals conceive crime and how populations perceive it, based on societal norms. Etymology. The word crime is derived from the Latin root cern, meaning I decide, I give judgment. Originally the Latin word crmen meant charge or cry of distress. The ancient Greek word crima, from which the Latin cognate derives, typically referred to an intellectual mistake, or an offense against the community, rather than a private or moral wrong. In 13th century English crime meant sinfulness according to etymonline.com. It was probably brought to England as Old French crimen, 12th century form of modern French crime, from Latin crimen. In the genitive case, criminis. In Latin, crimen could have signified any one of the following: charge, indictment, accusation, crime, fault, offense. The word may derive from the Latin cernere, to decide, to sift see crisis, mapped on kairos and chronos. But Ernest Klein, citing Karl Brugmann, rejects this, and suggests crimen, which originally would have meant cry of distress. Thomas G. Tucker suggests a root in cry words, and refers to English plaint, plaintiff, and so on. The meaning offense punishable by law dates from the late 14th century. The Latin word is glossed in Old English by facin, also deceit, fraud, treachery, cf. fake. Crime wave first attested in 1893, in American English. Definition. England and Wales. Whether a given act or omission constitutes a crime does not depend on the nature of that act or omission. It depends on the nature of the legal consequences that may follow it. An act or omission is a crime if it is capable of being followed by what are called criminal proceedings. History. The following definition of crime was provided by the Prevention of Crimes Act 1871, and applied for the purposes of Section 10 of the Prevention of Crime Act 1908. The expression crime means, in England and Ireland, any felony, or the offence of uttering false or counterfeit coin, or of possessing counterfeit gold or silver coin, or the offence of obtaining goods or money by false pretenses, or the offence of conspiracy to defraud, or any misdemeanor, under the 58th section of the Larceny Act, 1861. Scotland. For the purpose of Section 243, of the Trade Union and Labour Relations, Consolidation, Act 1992, a crime means an offence punishable on indictment, or an offence punishable on summary conviction, and for the commission of which the offender is liable under the statute making the offence punishable to be imprisoned, either absolutely, or at the discretion of the court, as an alternative for some other punishment. Sociology. A normative definition views crime as deviant behavior that violates prevailing norms, cultural standards prescribing how humans ought to behave normally. This approach considers the complex reality surrounding the concept of crime, and seeks to understand how changing social, political, psychological, and economic conditions may affect changing definitions of crime, and the form of the legal, law enforcement, and penal responses made by society. These structural realities remain fluid, and often contentious. For example, as cultures change, and the political environment shifts, societies may criminalize or decriminalize certain behaviors, which directly affects the statistical crime rates, influence the allocation of resources for the enforcement of laws, and re-influence the general public opinion. Similarly, changes in the collection and/or calculation of data on crime may affect the public perceptions of the extent of any given crime problem. All such adjustments to crime statistics, allied with the experience of people in their everyday lives, shape attitudes on the extent to which the state should use law, or social engineering, to enforce or encourage any particular social norm. Behavior can be controlled and influenced by whom in many ways, without having to resort to the criminal justice system. Indeed, in those cases where no clear consensus exists on a given norm, the drafting of criminal law by the group in power to prohibit the behavior of another group may seem to some observers an improper limitation of the second group's freedom, and the ordinary members of society have less respect for the law or laws in general, whether the authorities actually enforce the disputed law or not. Other definitions. Legislatures can pass laws, called mala prohibita, that define crimes against social norms. These laws vary from time to time, and from place to place. Note variations in gambling laws, for example, and the prohibition or encouragement of dueling in history. Other crimes, called mala in se, count as outlawed in almost all societies: murder, theft, and rape, for example. English criminal law and the related criminal law of Commonwealth countries can define offences that the courts alone have developed over the years, without any actual legislation, common law offences. The courts use the concept of mala in se to develop various common law offences. Criminalization. The spikeheads of executed criminals once adorned the gatehouse of the medieval London Bridge. One can view criminalization as a procedure deployed by society as a preemptive, harm reduction device, using the threat of punishment as a deterrent to anyone proposing to engage in the behavior causing harm. The state becomes involved because governing entities can become convinced that the costs of not criminalizing, through allowing the harms to continue unabated, outweigh the costs of criminalizing it, restricting individual liberty, for example, to minimize harm to others. Criminalization may provide future harm reduction at least to the outside population, assuming those shamed or incarcerated, or otherwise restrained for committing crimes start out more prone to criminal behavior. Likewise, one might assume original research that criminalize acts that in themselves do not harm other people. Victimless crimes may prevent subsequent harmful acts. Assuming that people prone to commit these acts may tend to commit harmful actions in general. Some who see the criminalization of victimless crimes as a pretext for imposing personal, religious, or moral convictions on otherwise productive citizens or taxpayers. Some commentators who may original research see criminalization as a way to make potential criminals pay or suffer for their prospective crimes. In this case, criminalization becomes a way to set the price that one must pay to society for certain actions considered detrimental to society as a whole. An extreme view might see criminalization as state-sanctioned revenge. States control the process of criminalization because even if victims recognize their own role as victims, they may not have the resources to investigate and seek legal redress for the injuries suffered. The enforcers formally appointed by the state often have better access to expertise and resources. The victims may only want compensation for the injuries suffered, while remaining indifferent to a possible desire for deterrence. Fear of retaliation may deter victims or witnesses of crimes from taking any action. Even in police societies, fear may inhibit from reporting incidents or from cooperating in a trial. Victims, on their own, may lack the economies of scale that could allow them to administer a penal system, let alone to collect any fines levied by a court. Group and Clerman, 2002, warn that a rent-seeking government has as its primary motivation to maximize revenue, and so, if offenders have sufficient wealth, a rent-seeking government will act more aggressively than a social welfare-maximizing government in enforcing laws against minor crimes, usually with a fixed penalty such as parking and routine traffic violations, but more laxly in enforcing laws against major crimes. As a result of the crime, victims may die or become incapacitated. Labeling theory. See the criminal. The label of crime and the accompanying social stigma normally confine their scope to those activities seen as injurious to the general population or to the state, including some that cause serious loss or damage to individuals. Those who apply the labels of crime or criminal intend to assert the hegemony of a dominant population or to reflect a consensus of condemnation for the identified behavior and to justify any punishments prescribed by the state in the event that standard processing tries and convicts an accused person of a crime. Natural law theory. Justifying the state's use of force to coerce compliance with its laws has proven a consistent theoretical problem. One of the earliest justifications involved the theory of natural law. This posits that the nature of the world or of human beings underlies the standards of morality or constructs them. Thomas Aquinas wrote in the 13th century, "The rule and measure of human acts is the reason, which is the first principle of human acts." Aquinas, Sti 2, Q.90, AI. He regarded people as by nature rational beings, concluding that it becomes morally appropriate that they should behave in a way that conforms to their rational nature. Thus, to be valid, any law must conform to natural law, and coercing people to conform to that law is morally acceptable. In the 1760s, William Blackstone, 1979-41, described the thesis. This law of nature, being coeval with mankind, and dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are of any validity, if contrary to this, and such of them as are valid derive all their force, and all their authority, mediately or immediately, from this original. But John Austin, 1790-1859, an early positivist, applied utilitarianism in accepting the calculating nature of human beings and the existence of an objective morality. He denied that the legal validity of a norm depends on whether its content conforms to morality. Thus in Austinian terms, a moral code can objectively determine what people ought to do. The law can embody whatever norms the legislature decrees to achieve social utility, but every individual remains free to choose what to do. Similarly, Hart, 1961, saw the law as an aspect of sovereignty, with lawmakers able to adopt any law as a means to a moral end. Thus the necessary and sufficient conditions for the truth of a proposition of law simply involved internal logic and consistency, and that the state's agents use state power with responsibility. Ronald Dworkin, 2005, rejects Hart's theory and proposes that all individuals should expect the equal respect and concern of those who govern them as a fundamental political right. He offers a theory of compliance overlaid by a theory of deference, the citizen's duty to obey the law, and a theory of enforcement, which identifies the legitimate goals of enforcement and punishment. Legislation must conform to a theory of legitimacy, which describes the circumstances under which a particular person or group is entitled to make law, and a theory of legislative justice, which describes the law they are entitled or obliged to make. Indeed, despite everything, the majority of natural law theorists have accepted the idea of enforcing the prevailing morality as a primary function of the law. This view entails the problem that it makes any moral criticism of the law impossible. If conformity with natural law forms a necessary condition for legal validity, all valid law must, by definition, count as morally just. Thus, on this line of reasoning, the legal validity of a norm necessarily entails its moral justice clarification needed. One can solve this problem by granting some degree of moral relativism, and accepting that norms may evolve over time, and, therefore, one can criticize the continued enforcement of old laws in the light of the current norms. People may find such law acceptable, but their use of state power to coerce citizens to comply with that law lacks moral justification. More recent conceptions of the theory characterize crime as the violation of individual rights. Since society considers so many rights as natural, hence the term right rather than man-made, what constitutes a crime also counts as natural, in contrast to laws seen as man-made. Adam Smith illustrates this view, saying that a smuggler would be an excellent citizen had not the laws of his country made that a crime which nature never meant to be so. Natural law theory therefore distinguishes between criminality which derives from human nature and illegality which originates with the interests of those in power. Lawyers sometimes express the two concepts with the phrases malum in se and malum prohibitum respectively. They regard a crime malum in se as inherently criminal, whereas a crime malum prohibitum, the argument goes, counts as criminal only because the law has decreed it so. This view leads to a seeming paradox. One can perform an illegal act without committing a crime, while a criminal act could be perfectly legal. Many Enlightenment thinkers, such as Adam Smith and the American founding fathers, subscribed to this view to some extent, and it remains influential among so-called classical liberals and libertarians. History. Some religious communities regard sin as a crime. Some may even highlight the crime of sin very early in legendary or mythological accounts of origins. Note the tale of Adam and Eve, and the theory of original sin. What one group considers a crime may cause or ignite war or conflict. However, the earliest known civilizations had codes of law containing both civil and penal rules mixed together, though not always in recorded form. The Sumerians produced the earliest surviving written codes. Uruk-hai-Jina, reigned c.2380 BC 2360 BC. Short chronology has an early code that has not survived. A later king, Ur-Nammu, left the earliest text in written law system, the Code of Nammu, c.2100 to 2050 BC, which prescribed a formal system of penalties for specific cases, in 57 articles. The Sumerians later issued other codes, including the Code of Lipid Estar. This code, from the 20th century BCE, contains some 50 articles, and scholars have reconstructed it by comparing several sources. The Sumerian was deeply conscious of his personal rights, and resented any encroachment on them, whether by his king, his superior, or his equal. No wonder that the Sumerians were the first to compile laws and law codes. Kramer. Successive legal codes in Babylon, including the Code of Hammurabi, c. 1790 BC, reflected Mesopotamian society's belief that law derived from the will of the gods, see Babylonian law. Many states at this time functioned as theocracies, with codes of conduct largely religious in origin or reference. Sir Henry Maine, 1861, studied the ancient codes available in his day, and failed to find any criminal law, in the modern sense of the word. While modern systems distinguish between offenses against the state or community, and offenses against the individual, the so-called penal law of ancient communities did not deal with crimes Latin, crimina, but with wrongs Latin, delicta. Thus the Hellenic laws treated all forms of theft, assault, rape, and murder as private wrongs, and left action for enforcement up to the victims or their survivors. The earliest system seemed to have lacked formal courts. The Romans systematized law and applied their system across the Roman Empire. Again, the initial rules of Roman law regarded assaults as a matter of private compensation. The most significant Roman law concept involved dominion. The paterfamilias owned all the family and its property, including slaves. The pater enforced matters involving interference with any property. The commentaries of Gaius, written between 130 and 180 AD, on the 12 tables treated freedom, in modern parlance, theft, as a tort. Similarly, assault and violent robbery involved trespass as to the pater's property, so, for example, the rape of a slave could become the subject of compensation to the pater, as having trespassed on his property, and breach of such laws created a vinculum juris, an obligation of law, that only the payment of monetary compensation, modern damages, could discharge. Similarly, the consolidated Teutonic laws of the Germanic tribes included a complex system of monetary compensations for what courts would now consider the complete range of criminal offenses against the person, from murder down. Even though Rome abandoned its Britannic provinces around 400 AD, the Germanic mercenaries, who had largely become instrumental in enforcing Roman rule in Britannia, acquired ownership of land there, and continued to use a mixture of Roman and Teutonic law, with much written down under the early Anglo-Saxon kings, but only when a more centralized English monarchy emerged following the Norman invasion, and when the kings of England attempted to assert power over the land and its peoples, did the modern concept emerge, namely of a crime not only as an offense against the individual, but also as a wrong against the state. This idea came from common law, and the earliest conception of a criminal act involved events of such major significance that the state had to usurp the usual functions of the civil tribunals and direct a special law or privilegium against the perpetrator. All the earliest English criminal trials involved wholly extraordinary and arbitrary courts, without any settled law to apply, whereas the civil, delictual law operated in a highly developed and consistent manner, except where a king wanted to raise money by selling a new form of writ. The development of the idea that the state dispenses justice in a court only emerges in parallel with or after the emergence of the concept of sovereignty. In continental Europe, Roman law persisted, but with a stronger influence from the Christian Church. Coupled with a more diffuse political structure based on smaller feudal units, various legal traditions emerged, remaining more strongly rooted in Roman jurisprudence, but modified to meet the prevailing political climate. In Scandinavia, the effect of Roman law did not become apparent until the 17th century, and the courts grew out of the things, the assemblies of the people. The people decided the cases, usually with largest freeholders dominating. The system later gradually developed into a system with a royal judge nominating a number of the most esteemed men of the parish as his board, fulfilling the function of the people of yore. From the Hellenic system onwards, the policy rationale for requiring the payment of monetary compensation for wrongs committed has involved the avoidance of feuding between clans and families. If compensation could mollify families' feelings, this would help to keep the peace. On the other hand, the institution of oaths also played down the threat of feudal warfare. Both in archaic Greece and in medieval Scandinavia, an accused person walked free if he could get a sufficient number of male relatives to swear him unguilty. Compare the United Nations Security Council, in which the veto power of the permanent member ensures that the organization does not become involved in crises where it could not enforce its decisions. These means of restraining private feuds did not always work, and sometimes prevented the fulfillment of justice. But in the earliest times the state did not always provide an independent policing force. Thus criminal law grew out what 21st century lawyers would call torts, and, in real terms, many acts and omissions classified as crimes actually overlap with civil law concepts. The development of sociological thought from the 19th century onwards prompted some fresh views on crime and criminality, and fostered the beginnings of criminology as a study of crime in society. Nietzsche noted a link between crime and creativity in the birth of tragedy. He asserted, the best and brightest that man can acquire he must obtain by crime. In the 20th century Michel Foucault in Discipline and Punish made a study of criminalization as a coercive method of state control. Classification and categorization. The examples and perspective in this section may not represent a worldwide view of the subject. Please improve this article and discuss the issue on the talk page. January 2010. Categorization by type. The following classes of offenses are used, or have been used, as legal terms of art. Offense against the person. Violent offense. Sexual offense. Offense against property. Researchers and commentators have classified crimes into the following categories, in addition to those above: forgery, personation and cheating, firearms and offensive weapons, offenses against the state / offenses against the crown and government / political offenses, harmful or dangerous drugs, offenses against religion and public worship, offenses against public justice / offenses against the administration of public justice, public order offense, commerce, financial markets and insolvency, offenses against public morals and public policy, motor vehicle offenses, conspiracy, incitement, and attempt to commit crime, inchoate offense, juvenile delinquency. Categorization by penalty. One can categorize crimes depending on the related punishment, with sentencing tariffs prescribed in line with the perceived seriousness of the offense. Thus fines and non-custodial sentences may address the crime scene as least serious, with lengthy imprisonment, or, in some jurisdictions, capital punishment reserved for the most serious. Common law. Under the common law of England, crimes were classified as either treason, felony, or misdemeanor, with treason sometimes being included with the felonies. The system was based on the perceived seriousness of the offense. It is still used in the United States, but the distinction between felony and misdemeanor is abolished in England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Classification by mode of trial. The following classes of offense are based on mode of trial. Indictable only offense, indictable offense, hybrid offense, aka either way offense in England and Wales, summary offense, aka infraction in the US. Classification by origin. In common law countries, crimes may be categorized into common law offenses and statutory offenses. In the US, Australia, and Canada, in particular, they are divided into federal crimes and interstate crimes. Other classifications. Arrestable offense. U.S. classification. In the United States since 1930, the FBI has tabulated Uniform Crime Reports, UCR, annually from crime data submitted by law enforcement agencies across the United States. Officials compile this data at the city, county, and state levels into the UCR. They classify violations of laws based on common law as Part I, Index, crimes in UCR data. These are further categorized as violent or property crimes. Part I violent crimes include murder and criminal homicide, voluntary manslaughter, forcible rape, aggravated assault, and robbery, while Part I property crimes include burglary, arson, larceny/theft, and motor vehicle theft. All other crimes can come under Part 2. For convenience, such lists usually include infractions, although, in the U.S., they may come into the sphere not of the criminal law, but rather of the civil law. Compare tortfeasance. Booking arrests require detention for a time frame ranging 1 to 24 hours. Offence in common law jurisdictions. In England and Wales, as well as in Hong Kong, the term offence means the same thing as and is interchangeable with the term crime. They are further split into summary offences, indictable offences, causes and correlates of crime. Many different causes and correlates of crime have been proposed with varying degree of empirical support. They include socio-economic, psychological, biological, and behavioral factors. Controversial topics include media violence research and effects of gun politics. Crimes in international law. International criminal law. Kankakyu before the Cambodian Genocide Tribunal on July 20, 2009. Crimes defined by treaty as crimes against international law include crimes against peace, crimes of apartheid, forced disappearance, genocide, piracy, sexual slavery, waging a war of aggression, war crimes. From the point of view of state-centric law, extraordinary procedures, usually international courts, may prosecute such crimes. Note the role of the International Criminal Court at The Hague, in the Netherlands. Popular opinion in the Western world and former Soviet Union often associates international law with the concept of opposing terrorism, seen as a crime as distinct from warfare. Religion and crime. Religious sentiment often becomes a contributory factor of crime. 1819 anti-Jewish riots in Frankfurt, where rioters attacked Jewish businesses and destroyed property. Different religious traditions may promote distinct norms of behavior, and these in turn may clash or harmonize with the perceived interests of the state. Socially accepted or imposed religious morality has influenced secular jurisdictions on issues that may otherwise concern only an individual's conscience. Activities sometimes criminalized on religious grounds include, for example, alcohol consumption, prohibition, abortion, and stem cell research. In various historical and present-day societies, institutionalized religions have established systems of earthly justice that punish crimes against the divine will and against specific devotional, organizational and other rules under specific codes, such as Roman Catholic canon law. Military jurisdictions and states of emergency. In the military sphere, authorities can prosecute both regular crimes and specific acts, such as mutiny or desertion, under martial law codes that either supplant or extend civil codes in times of, for example, war. Many constitutions contain provisions to curtail freedoms and criminalize otherwise tolerated behaviors under a state of emergency in the event of war, natural disaster, or civil unrest. Undesired activities at such times may include assembly in the streets, violation of curfew, or possession of firearms. Employee crime. Two common types of employee crime exist: embezzlement and sabotage. The complexity and anonymity of computer systems may help criminal employees camouflage their operations. The victims of the most costly scams include banks, brokerage houses, insurance companies, and other large financial institutions. Most people guilty of embezzlement do not have criminal histories. Embezzlers tend to have a gripe against their employer, have financial problems, or simply an inability to resist the temptation of a loophole they have found. Screening and background checks on prospective employees can help in prevention. However, many laws make some types of screening difficult or even illegal. Fired or disgruntled employees sometimes sabotage their company's computer system as a form of payback. The sabotage may take the form of a logic bomb, a computer virus, or creating general havoc. Some places of employment have developed measures in an attempt to combat and prevent employee crime. Places of employment sometimes implement security measures such as cameras, fingerprint records of employees, and background checks. Although privacy advocates have questioned such methods, they appear to serve the interests of the organizations using them. Not only do these methods help prevent employee crime, but they protect the company from punishment and/or lawsuits for negligent hiring. Verification needed.